Hey folks, Malforian here, and today we're going to be covering the Crusader Kings 3 dev diary for today, 147, some words from our game director. This could be renamed many words from our game director. This is a pretty huge dev diary. It's probably the largest one we've received in over a year, I would think. There's a lot of information here. There's information about how they're going to improve the game at the moment with events, how plagues and legends are going to work. There's also the patch notes for the patch that's coming next week, which we've seen some about previously, but there's the full patch notes in this dev diary. And then the most important one, the one you're probably all here actually for, is what they're going to be doing in Roads to Power and how they've changed some of those systems already based on our feedback. You will see as well some screenshots of how some of the systems are going to work. There's a lot of information in here, as I said. So what I'm actually going to do, and a bit of a tease, I guess, to all of you, is I'm actually going to split this dev diary into 3 videos because there's so much to talk about. This video would probably be at least an hour long if we went through it all. So in this first video, I'm going to talk about the rebuilding of some of the systems that we already have. In the next video after that, which will probably come out later today as well, I'm going to go through the patch notes for next week's patch because there's a lot of interesting information in there about changes that are coming. And then in the third video, the one you're all here for, what's coming in Roads to Power and some really interesting changes that are actually coming pretty quickly on how certain things are going to play out in the game, especially around succession. So do make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. All of that's going to be coming over the next 24 hours. And then it also sounds like we might get the dev diary for the next DLC starting relatively soon. Maybe not next week because we do have the patch next week, but it does sound like later in the dev diary that the dev diaries for Roads to Power are going to be maybe starting relatively soon. But anyway, enough waffling already. Let's get into it. As I said, we're going to be talking about how they're going to rebuild some of the game that we're already playing. This is based on feedback. They do say here they've received a lot of feedback around Legends of the Dead through forums, Reddit, videos, reviews. Hey, maybe they even watch my videos. Who knows? I doubt it, but a man could dream. And they've basically taken on that feedback, parsed it together, seen what they think is like the best way to do something, and then they're going to implement that into the game itself. So the first thing they're going to talk about is plagues. Overall, before we get into this, I think plagues work quite well. They are very impactful when they're really going at you, but I will agree with some of the sentiment that is here that there's a lot of minor plagues that don't really affect you and you just kind of get bogged down in event pop-ups and things like that. So that is going to be some of the stuff they talk about. So as they say, plagues is the feature that was the easiest to collect and action feedback for, even if a variety of types of feedback were sometimes conflated and need to be untangled for them to know exactly what players were looking for. This is, again, I say this in the EU5 videos I do. If you have feedback about the game, make sure to give that feedback because the game's only going to get better if we tell them we don't like how this system works, we do like how this works. At the end of the day, they want us to play the game, they want us to buy the DLC, so they're going to make the game that we want. I will say that has limitations. We don't want them implementing every bit of feedback players have, because at the end of the day, players sometimes don't know what they want, or they think they want something, but they actually don't, as a famous man once said. So do keep that in mind, but do give like honest, constructive feedback, and then you might see some improvements in the future on these systems. So again, just remember to do that if you are interested. And then they continue here with your sentiment was somehow split between plagues, either being too easy or too hard, but uniformly, it was basically you give us too many events and we just get spammed, especially if you have a large empire. You're just constantly getting these pop-ups about this plague started here, this plague started somewhere else. Like, I don't care about it, to be honest, unless it's like a tier 3 apocalyptic plague. And even then, if it's far out from my realm, I don't really care about it. So some of that is going to be addressed. They do say all the changes they talk about here should be coming in the free update that comes next week on the 8th of May, and the full changelog is in this dev diary. I will leave a link to it in the description down below, but as I say, I'll cover the patch notes separately in the next video on the channel. And as discussed, the event spam is one of the things that players really hated with plagues, and this all basically came down to one event. It is the one where it's like, give us some money because there's a plague here, and you're like, cool. I either take, I think, a prestige hit or a legitimacy hit, I can't remember off the top of my head, or you give them like 150 gold, and it was just super annoying. And they do recognize that. They say it was down to one bug. This event should only trigger like every 5 years, but instead it was just triggering whenever it was available. So that was the major problem with this. I'm kind of surprised it wasn't fixed sooner if that was the case. Seems like a relatively quick fix. I'm not a game designer or a programmer, but just fixing that bug seems like something they maybe could have done a hotfix for. I know that's obviously quite a bit of work, but still, with how annoying it was, it would have been nice to get this fixed earlier, but we are going to get it fixed. And they're going to fix that by slightly changing the punishment this event gives and also make it so it doesn't happen like every 2 minutes. And you are going to have these negative effects, but it's not going to be every 2 years you're paying money to these different locations just because they got a plague there. It is going to have that longer cooldown, and it's not going to be quite as bad when it does take effect. And the second bit of feedback they received is that events are kind of annoying. As I was saying, in the example they give here, if you're the King of France, do you really care about something that's happening in the south of Aquitaine or in the east side of the HRE or in Scotland or something? But if it was close enough, it would actually trigger events for you, telling you about plagues that were happening, different things like that. And at the end of the day, as I said before, you don't really care about them. So to fix this, they're going to limit it so you don't get notifications about this unless it's within roughly the size of Ireland from your realm. So think of how big Ireland is on the map. If a plague happens within that kind of area around your capital, you'll get notified about it. If it's outside of that, you're not going to get told about it, but you can see it in the UI everywhere else. If you're keeping an eye on the game, you're going to know these are happening, especially with the visualization of plagues on the map, but you're just not going to get constant pop-ups saying, there's a plague here, there's a plague here, this has happened here. Like, I only care if they're close enough to affect my capital for the most part, because outside of that, I can see it on the map. That is one thing they're going to be changing, which I think is very welcome, a little less spam. And then on top of that, an interesting change, they're actually going to reduce the overall frequency of plague events and shifted the ratio between minor, major, and apocalyptic plagues. So as they say here, you should see less plagues, but the ones that happen should be more significant, which is a good change. The minor ones generally didn't really do anything, and they did kind of add on to that bloat and that kind of spamming of events and things. So I think this is a good change. The minor ones you could basically ignore for the most part anyway. They have also, if you are an achievement hunter, if you lower the game rule for frequency, it also doesn't affect achievements, which if I'm honest, I didn't even realize was a thing. So there you go. If you did lower it, I guess you weren't eligible for achievements, but you can now put it on the lowest one outside of disabling the Black Death, and then you still get achievements, which is good. Again, I like earning achievements, but I don't really care if somebody can turn down the difficulty and still get the same achievements. It doesn't affect me. I still get the kind of reward of doing that achievement. And if they get it a little bit easier, so be it. I don't really mind. And then some further feedback on plagues. As I said, there's a lot of information here. And they say here a lot of the feedback is that the difficulty is either lack of challenge for ourselves or that the AI is also kind of like weird with how it acts with plagues. So it felt often that the AI was much worse at handling plagues than the player. And they agree with that. They say the AI was pretty terrible. It could decimate entire realms, and the AI would basically do nothing about it. So while the AI will never be as responsive as a player, which is very true, when it comes to isolating or secluding, they should at least try do it. Choosing to defend themselves shouldn't be dependent on some minor quirks of personality or truly major ones. So with this, and it is covered in the patch notes, they're going to make it so they're more likely to go into seclusion or more likely to isolate, but then some traits like eccentric, etc. will affect that. It's kind of balancing out a little bit more so the AI actually kind of bothers to do something. And then the last thing they're going to talk about is how larger counties with more baronies kind of have it easier than they should have when combating plagues. This is due to how buildings work. And to fix this, they're going to switch the plague resistance bonuses by buildings from being county-wide to being barony-wide. So this will then be more historically accurate. The counties with a lot more baronies are going to find it harder to have that resistance because they're going to have buildings in each barony that affect it, whereas the smaller counties have less baronies, so you don't have to worry about it quite as much. And as they say, this should encourage an alternate playstyle of having fewer barony counties in your domain in order to protect your development, which makes sense. This should then, in fact, make the game a little bit more challenging for players and even it out between the AI and players themselves. And as they say here, more information in the patch notes, which I'll cover in the next video about this. There's not that much more information in there, but it does kind of flesh it out a little bit. So that's all about plagues. Let me know what you think. I think these are all good changes, make them spawn less often, make them more impactful, and then having the event spam and things like that change how they work. I think are all good changes. We'll see how they play out from next week. And then obviously the other major part of the last DLC was Legends. Are Legends good? I'm not too sure. I think they're okay, but they are one of these game systems where for the most part, you don't generally actually feel how good they are unless you're starting to max them out and things like that. I think it is a good system, but it's definitely got ways it could be improved. And that is what they're going to talk about. So the first thing they say is that they've already made a change. They added that Legends library that you now have, where you can complete Legends and have them kind of in there forever. And they also made the chapter text, made it more reactive to things that you did, such as winning battles, having children, etc., amongst other things. Now, the funny thing is, I've actually seen some feedback from players saying the opposite, that this made it worse because you had a legend that was about a certain thing, and then if you played long enough, it kind of just got replaced with kind of like garbage, I guess, about like, you won this random battle, you had a child, built this building, you conquered these lands. and it ended up being less about the legend and more about just random stuff your character did. I actually like the new way of it working. I think it is cooler that it's a bit more variation to it, but maybe it could be balanced the other way. Let me know what you think, because I can see it both ways, so I think it's pretty cool. The first thing they've done, this is one of the bits of feedback that I had, is that the Legends map mode was terrible. It was uninspiring and not pleasant to look at, as they say, due to the limited color palette. And this is very true. Pretty much in every game I had a legend that was yellow, and then another legend that spawned next to me that was also yellow. And you really couldn't tell the difference between where they started and where they ended, especially if they overlapped and they were both in the same county and things like that. It was super annoying. And to fix that, they've added a bunch of new colors. As you can see in this screenshot, there's a nice shade of green, there's French blue, there's English red, and then there's a nice aquamarine blue at the bottom. So this should help with a little bit of variation on colors, so they're a little bit easier to see on the map, and you're not kind of like trying to squint and see exactly what's going on. So a good change to begin with, definitely down for this. And then feedback they received on how the system actually works is how hard it is to actually act upon legends. As they mentioned previously, opinions on this vary greatly, and I think that is true, from thinking they were underpowered and useless to overpowered and way too good, or that they should be something else entirely. Some keep bringing up examples of the CK2 bloodlines. I actually really like the CK2 bloodlines. I can see why they didn't want to just redo that feature from CK2, but I think that actually maybe worked a little bit better. It kind of fitted in with how the game plays a little bit, but I can see how Legends also fits in. Maybe we'll get like a weakened version of CK2 bloodlines in the future, because otherwise we're going to get way more stat stacking, and we know they hate that, even though it keeps getting added to the game. And that system was built around reputations for what people were actually doing, or deeds about things that they had done. This was literally transferred in their blood through paternal or matrilineal lineage, with some convoluting breeding necessary to stack multiple lines on the same character. Many people did that, of course. And as I say, they didn't want it to be like linked directly into your character in that way, in that you could pass it down through your bloodline, which I will agree kind of doesn't make sense, I guess, because you could end up just spreading it to random people around the map. I can see why they didn't want to kind of bring that back in the same way. And then for CK3, they wanted the legend system to actually mimic what medieval rulers did, so embellishing mundane stories into epics of great renown, all in order to bolster their legitimacy in the eyes of the subjects or the renown of their dynasty. So, you know, trying to ground it in a little bit more realism around where medieval rulers would say, oh yeah, my grandfather, yeah, he totally slayed that dragon. You know, he wasn't just fighting some random dude. He slayed a dragon, and that's what happened. And then it becomes like a myth and legend, hence the name. And then that's kind of what gets passed down or spread. And then it sometimes passes out of knowledge and gets forgotten about. So as much as I did like Bloodlines, I think reading through this, it does kind of fit CK3 a little bit more, having this more grounded. It has got some fantastical elements, but it was more like real life, where they would get told by people about members of their dynasty, and it spread for a little bit, and then maybe it kind of disappeared, and people forgot about these stories, or people figured out it was a lie. But they do continue to say which of these approaches is best. There are merits to both, but as I've said, they've really tried to err towards like true to history in CK3, and that's why they've done it this way. They've taken away some of the fantastical elements, and they want CK3 to play kind of more realistic. And that's why they went with this system rather than just copying Bloodlines. The next bit, I'm not sure if people are going to agree with. Truth be told, they think the problem with Legends lies less with the feature itself and how they talked about it in the dev diaries. Pretty much saying that they, not like confused players, but they didn't really explain exactly how it played out in game. And players got this idea of how it might work, and then it hasn't matched that. I don't actually agree with this. I think the dev diaries pretty much laid out how it works. Maybe it didn't go into enough detail. They do cover that now, saying they are going to get into a little bit more detail-filled behemoths, as they call them, for Roads to Power. So we're going to get dev diaries that are a lot bigger, a lot more information. I will actually agree with this point that I think the dev diaries for Legends of the Dead were pretty small. I think we only got 3 of them in the end, and they didn't really go into that much information exactly how something worked. But I wouldn't agree that they missold, I think, Legends. I think Legends worked how I thought they would from reading the dev diaries. Maybe that's more because obviously I read them for the channel, I cover them in these videos, we talk about it in the comments down below. So I guess maybe we pieced things together and then it worked how we thought it would. I guess if you're more of a fair weather player, come in every so often when there's DLC, you don't really read the dev diaries, or maybe you just go over them quickly. Maybe you would have got confused by it, I guess, but I don't know. I think they actually describe them pretty well, so I'm not sure if I agree with this. I think it's just players trying to iterate on these systems and make them better, and that is what we're seeing. So again, a good outcome for all. And with all that being said, that covers the changes they're going to bring to the Legends of the Dead DLC specifically around plagues and legends. Next, they're going to talk about bettering the game across a multitude of things and how they've learned that some features that they built for launch don't really work how they thought they would, and that we're going to potentially see more balancing happening in the future more often, which is cool to see. Some areas, as they'll get into around cultural traditions, etc., are just players will just pick the best one, and they'll never really interact with some of them because they're just not fun, they're not engaging or interesting. So they do know, especially around like court events for the Royal Court, there's a lot of issues around. This content in theory is good, but it's actually annoying to do. So that is what they're going to cover next. And how they're going to do that? Well, they actually have balance days every 3 weeks now for the game where they just sit down and talk about game balance and where they can review and change these features. Currently, these days are focused on improving some of the older content they've released, as well as doing balance passes on things such as prestige and cultural traditions. As I was talking about, the main philosophy they're following when reviewing old content is to balance it for fun. Hallelujah. At the end of the day, as much as I think stat stacking gets out of control in pretty much every Paradox game, we're here to play this game for fun, to tell stories. Yes, there's people who just want to min-max and will probably, I guess, get like salty if something's just way overpowered or something. But at the end of the day, I want them to balance, as they're saying here, the game to be fun and less annoying to play, or have events and content that just constantly give you bad effects. Very much like Royal Court events, which generally for the most part are annoying and just cause you headaches and don't make you think that you're really excited to hold court. You're usually dreading it and eventually just press it because you're annoyed of the notification. So they are going to cover some of that here. As they say, if a piece of content isn't already engaging, flavorful, interesting, or fulfilling in a specific purpose, then it needs to at least be entertaining or useful. So something could be bad for you, but if it's still fun to play through, it's not all bad. But at the moment, there's too many parts of the game that are annoying to play through, cause you to have negative effects, and aren't actually fun to do. And on that, right now, they're working on court events for the Royal Court. Yes, please. A set of events that are regarded very poorly and inconsequential by many players, and they do agree with that assessment in hindsight. And what they're doing, which is awesome, is they're actually ripping out and replacing much of the content within the events for the Royal Court. So all those stories about the priest's head rolling into your realm, somebody coming in and spending lots of money and putting you to shame, etc., bringing in a ward that you have to look after, all these events that you've seen 1,000 times that are just annoying, they are actually replacing most of these and giving us a whole new set of them. And there is a screenshot later on with a new event that is coming. So this is amazing to see. They're actually going into old content and making it better for us, which they do have on Stellaris. I can't remember what they're called. Is it the Guardian team? I forget the exact name they have, but they have a content team on Stellaris that their entire job is to go into old content and make it better, rebalance it. And it sounds like maybe we've got a mini version of that in Crusader Kings 3 already, going in and making these old systems better, which is just a win for us. We've already paid for this DLC, or we've already kind of funded the development of this DLC in the past, and them going back and making it better is awesome to see. The second issue they're also going to be covering soon is Prestige. They've taken a look at what causes the AI to go into Prestige dead and thus unable to declare war, because it's less challenging in the game if the AI isn't declaring war on you. I see this a lot on the forums and on Reddit, saying like the game's not hard because the AI never declares war on you. There are many reasons for that. The AI cannot declare war on you because it knows it's going to lose, because you are a player, you've probably got more troops than them, and they know there's no point in declaring war on you. If you ever want to see this in action, somehow lose like half your troops through a pointless war, and then suddenly people will attack you because the AI will look and say, oh, they're weakened, I'm going to declare war on you. I'm sure you've all seen it where you've got a sudden spate of wars declared. If you lose a big war, then everyone kind of sees you're in trouble and starts to declare war on you. But they want to get that happening a little bit more often in the game, even outside of that. And they've kind of recognized that people going to prestige debt is some of the reason around that. They're also, as I discussed earlier, going to look at many cultural traditions. At the moment, there's not really that many that people choose from. The trade-offs are kind of annoying in places. A lot of players just choose the same ones, or they even don't even look at the cultural traditions for the most part because there isn't really anything that interesting. So they're going to look at those, redo them, give some larger buffs and some more significant, interesting trade-offs. This is great. Kind of mixing this system up a little bit. And then updating older content or doing large balance passes is always on their radar, and they will often arrive together with larger updates. All of what they've mentioned here, court events, AI prestige debt, and cultural tradition balance, will be arriving with Roads to Power. So these redos are coming with the next DLC as part of the free patch. And as I say, I'll put it up on the screen now. This is an example of a replacement event for the court. And as you can see, 2 outcomes, but they're generally giving you a good thing. Increases the effectiveness of domestic affairs. The other one affecting guest acceptance and cutting the cost of your feasts for 15 years. So look at this. 2 outcomes that are good, and you can choose one of them. At the moment, this would probably be more annoying negative modifiers, but cool to see. I really like how these are going to look. As I said, this dev diary is a huge one, and this video is going to go on for a little bit longer. So if you haven't already, do hit that like button. We've got a little bit more to cover here. And the next thing they're going to talk about is event frequency. I'm not going to read through all of this. The overall thing here is that they understand that, one, you get way too many events way too often, and that even like little niche events like being blocked by a challenge on the road, seeing the ducks, etc., and following them into a bush, they happen way too often that they don't really stand out as like weird things that might happen. You're pretty much expecting them to happen even multiple times on the same character. So they do understand that players are a little bit tired of seeing the same thing. I will agree with this on my campaigns, especially the ones I do on the channel. I've started like editing out these a little bit because you just see the same ones so often. It's a little bit boring to just go through it and pick the same option and then just have this same event happen next time you go traveling. It's a little bit annoying, and they do agree that is the case. They did have this old philosophy of there being general events that happen quite often and then niche events that happen less often but had more impact. But they're even saying here that they actually triggered way too often for them to even be that niche, and they happened enough that you kind of expected them to happen for the most part anyway. And to fix this, there's a couple of things they're going to do. They're going to add more significant cooldowns and a new system to restrict certain events for characters so you don't see them as often. So the pros of this is that you will see the same event way less often. We would have more general event content between characters, so you're not going to see the same event on every character, so it kind of stands out a little bit more. When you encounter those events on different ones, you're going to remember it a little bit more. Rare events will also become somewhat more visible though, due to fewer general events being valid. As these general events go on to cooldown, you might actually see some of these rare events more often, because how the system works is it will trigger should an event happen, and then it picks an event from these different pools. And they're saying if they add more cooldowns to certain events, there's actually less chance of you getting the same event more often. So some of these other events that weren't even part of the kind of like spam that you get at the moment, you might actually see those a little bit more often, but again, they are going to be cooldown affected, so you're not going to see it all the time. So generally, you're going to see less events, but you should see a wider variety of events when you do encounter them. The cons of this, though, is that some event pools might give you less content over time, which might be a pro for some of you. So yeah, they're saying, look, we probably need more events for this to kind of work how we want it to do now. But if you're playing a lot, you might actually just have way less events because you've seen so many of them. The cooldowns are in effect for each event, and you get a big kind of swathe of time where you don't see any events. And as I say, some of you might like this. You might like less events. Is it a bad thing? It kind of is, but it also kind of isn't. And I would go along with that. I'd rather see less events, but more unique to a character, than have it work now where you get a lot of events and you just see the same ones so often. You kind of blur them in your mind, and you're not even really paying attention. You're just clicking the answer that you know is good. So I actually think this is a plus. I can see it as a con for some players, but I think as they keep building up content for the game, it's going to get better and better, so I don't think it is actually that bad. They do go into some information of how this is going to work. Again, I'm not going to read through this. They're just going to change how frequent this is going to happen and when you might see it on a character. If you want to read through it, I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. It is interesting, though, how it does work, so you might get some understanding on why you see certain things and why you don't on other characters. So all in all, pretty good. And the next thing they're going to talk about, which is the final thing in this rebuilding the foundations, pretty much part of the dev diary, so I'm not going to keep you that much longer, is about the message settings, which again is a system that I'm kind of amazed is only going to come in now with Roads to Power. We had this in CK2. The UI is much nicer in this one, but it is basically the same system. And this is going to allow you to kind of customize your pop-ups and messages to how you want to play, turning off certain ones, changing how they show for you in game. I really like this. This is awesome. There's some things that get put in that right-hand side feed, as it's called, that I would actually like to know about a little bit more often so I can see it. And you can change this so you get pop-ups and toasts, etc. As you can see in this screenshot, here's some examples. So siege completed, you'll get the feed on the right-hand side. Hostile siege started, though, you'll get a pop-up. and they show this again in a second, where it will come up and say this area is getting sieged down. And as you can see, you can also tick this to pause the game. So if you're playing on speed 4 or 5, you're just blasting through it, you can actually change this so it will pause the game if some of these kind of more interesting events happen that you might be interested in, and then you can kind of go and look at it and then unpause the game. So this is awesome. Again, kind of surprising this wasn't in the game before with it being in CK2, and I think quite a good feature in CK2. I did do a community post and somebody said, what does toast mean? It's obviously not talking about the, you know, toasted bread. I believe toast is where you get the kind of pop-up from the top of the screen. You see this for a couple events in the game. It actually escapes my mind which ones do this. Where it pops down from the top, you usually get the image of your character, and then it'll say something has happened at the top there. I think that's what toast means. Pop-up is obviously where it comes up as like, you have accepted an alliance or something like that. That's usually a pop-up that comes up on the screen. Feed is the thing on the right-hand side. And as I say, toast is where it actually pops down from the top. And it usually has your portrait and then a little bit of a scroll explaining something next to it, which is actually my favorite, I think, type. So I'll probably change a lot of them to toast because it's not as intrusive, but it's enough that you see it happening and you can read about it. All in all, great that you could change this. It looks like there's a bunch of options. This is only a small section, as you can see from the scroll bar. And then as you can see in that screenshot I was talking about, you actually get a nice little bit of UI. I think this is from the Byzantine DLC. That border, I've not seen that elsewhere. I'm pretty sure that looks like it's from the Byzantine DLC that we're getting in the future because it looks kind of flavorful. I believe that is part of the Byzantine Empire in the background, but there we go. I like this. I like being able to control what notifications you get and that you can tell it to pause. I think that is also a good change as well. That is where this video is going to end for today. As I said, a lot of information here. I didn't want to do the entire dev diary in one video. This one's already going to be at least half an hour long by the time it comes up on the channel. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hit that like button if you have. Subscribe if you're new here. I cover a lot of Crusader Kings, all the dev diaries. It does sound like we are going to get information about the next DLC pretty soon, it sounded like. As I said, not next week. We've got a free patch coming then. So I would think maybe a week or two after that, we'll start getting some dev diaries about what's coming in the next DLC. We can guess in the comments down below when we think that might come. And as I say, I'm going to be covering the patch notes in the next video. And then in the third video from this dev diary, I'm going to be talking about what's coming in the future. There's a very interesting part coming next in this dev diary about which content's going to be free and paid for in the future. I didn't want that to be at the end of this video because, look, I'll be honest, I know a lot of people aren't going to make it this far, so I want to talk about that first, and then we can talk about that in that video's comments. But we'll leave it there for today. I'll see you in the next one.